So there was a moment recently, one of my clients called me in the middle of his Caribbean TBI program. He was applying for a Caribbean citizenship. And he said something I've never actually been asked before. He said, Joseph, my wife is pregnant. Is it possible to obtain the citizenship through the birth of our child, for our baby? Now, this is a very different question from the usual investment questions I'm asked. Most people in my industry think about citizenship through investment, through descent, through residency, through tax planning, or a general mobility strategy. But what this client was really asking was this: is there a completely different legal route that families should understand when applying for citizenship? And the answer is yes, there is. The route is called Jus Soli. It's Latin, I believe, and it means the right of the soil. It means that some countries will allow, if a child is born there, that child may automatically acquire citizenship simply by the virtue of being born on that country's territory. Now, before I go into this further, this is not legal advice, it is not tax advice, and it is certainly not a one-size-fits-all strategy. But it is a very real and important concept for international mobility and for families to understand. And if you are a high net wealth family looking long-term about optionality, residency, education, passport strength, and future family security, then this is a subject worth understanding properly. What makes this so interesting is that many families spend a great deal of time looking at investment programs, yet they overlook the fact that the birth of a child can sometimes have very meaningful citizenship consequences. Now, I want to be careful here because this is not a magic shortcut, and it is also not the case that every country treats the parents the same way, and this is where people can get confused. You hear the phrase birthright citizenship and you assume the outcome will be the same everywhere. Well, it certainly is not. And in some countries, the biggest benefit is really only for the child. But in others, the child's status can also have a very meaningful effect on the parent's residency position and options. And if you do not understand that distinction properly, you can make a very expensive strategic mistake. The basic principle, so what is the principle of Jus Soli? So let us strip this back and make it simple. Jus Soli means that a child born in a country may be recognized as a citizen of that country because of its place of birth. Canada is a very clear example of this. Canada is one of the biggest mainstream examples. The Canadian government states that a person is likely a Canadian citizen if born in Canada, subject to some exceptions with certain diplomatics, children of diplomats, etc. But that's common everywhere. Brazil, however, is another major example where I live. Brazil is beautiful, by the way. And it is very interesting from a strategic planning perspective because parent-child immigration routes are recognized in the system in Brazil as well. Mexico is another one. Mexico is widely understood as a Jus Soli jurisdiction, but this is where nuance matters. You should not assume that because your child may have status by birth, you as parents will automatically receive the same outcome. It is very different, and that is the key point. The child's citizenship position and the parent's immigration position, yes, they are related, but they are not the same thing. The strategic question families should ask is this: can we just get a passport by having a child in another country? No, that is far too simplistic. The better question is this: what legal rights, residency options, and long-term citizenship pathways might open up for us and our family if a child is born in a particular jurisdiction? That is a serious strategic question. Because once you frame it properly, you stop thinking emotionally and you start thinking structurally. You start asking, what is the strength of my child's future passport? What rights does that child have in later life? Does the birth create any immediate or medium-term residency pathways for us as parents? How long will it take the parents to move from residency to citizenship, if at all? What are the tax consequences? What are the healthcare, compliance, practical relocation considerations, etc., etc. And above all, is this suitable for our particular family or not? Now, if we look at this at the high level, Canada is powerful because Canadian citizenship is highly respected globally, and a child born there will generally have that citizenship from birth, and again, subject to certain exceptions. However, there are certain tax disadvantages in Canada we can talk about another time. But Canada should not be sold through the parents simply get permanent residency, because a child was born there. That is not the way to explain it. Brazil, however, is more interesting in a different way. Brazil combines birthright citizenship for the child with a more strategically relevant discussion around the parents, because being the father or mother of a Brazilian child is recognized in Brazil's immigration framework as a real residency-related basis. This makes Brazil one of the more compelling jurisdictions in this conversation. But if a family is specifically looking at the wider family outcome rather than just the child's passport alone. Mexico also sits somewhere in the conversation as an important Jus Soli country, but it should be discussed with care. It is sensible to say that Mexico belongs in the strategic analysis. It's worth considering. It is not sensible to imply that all consequences for the parents are automatic or identical to Brazil. So if I was explaining this to one of my clients privately, which I've just done, I would say this: do not ask what country gives citizenship to the child. Ask which country creates the best family strategy. This is much more in line with an intelligent question. Who is this actually suitable for? Now, let me get on to something important. This is definitely not for everybody. It may be highly relevant for international mobility, families, or families already considering a second citizenship, and for people looking at education and long-term relocation options, or for clients who want to build multiple layers of optionality for the next generation. But it's not something to approach casually. It's a big, big life-changing decision. You need to think about timing, travel, medical arrangements, legal process, residency consequences, tax planning, and how this fits in with your family's broader international strategy. You also need to think about reputation, compliance, and substance. Because if you handle a sophisticated international matter in an unsophisticated way, it will definitely create problems, more problems than it will solve. And that's a real mistake most people make. The biggest mistake with the subject is they confuse a legal principle with a finished strategy. Jus Soli is a principle, it is not on its own a strategy. The strategy comes from understanding how that principle interacts with residency law, national law, tax exposure, timeframes, family objectives, and long-term planning and objectives. In other words, the birth of a child can create an opportunity, but whether that opportunity becomes valuable depends entirely on what you do next. This is where expert planning matters. I think this topic matters more today than it did a decade ago, because sophisticated families are no longer thinking in one direction. They're certainly thinking about general mobility, far more than they did previously. And people are not just asking, what passport can I buy? They're asking, how can I create resilience for my family? How do I create mobility? How do I create options for my children? How do I reduce concentration around one country, one system, or one political environment? And once families begin asking these questions properly, they start to realize that citizenship planning is much broader than investment programs alone. That is precisely why this subject deserves attention. So if you take one thing away from this video, let it be this. Yes, in some countries, a child by birth can acquire citizenship for the parents as well as the child. And in certain cases, that can be part of a very intelligent long-term family building strategy. But no, the parental outcome is not uniform across jurisdictions. And no serious family should approach this without proper planning. If you are looking for second citizenship or residency by investment or different options, then this is what we do. We consult families on how to move internationally. So if you would like some further information, then visit our website, frederickcapital.com, or you can contact me on the link in the bio, and I will be happy to help.